billions of stars in every galaxy, and the estimates are, at least Russ estimates, 100 billion galaxies full of suns or stars containing abundance of energy. We can't even conceive of the energy in the star, the sun that we survive from. Can you conceive of all of the stars put together? I don't think we can conceive of it. God created that, so He is greater than that, and He has more power than all of that. In fact, Psalm 62:11 says, power belongs to Him. It originates from Him. It is His, and He has simply dispensed it. He has simply placed it within the creation. But it ultimately belongs to Him. That's a tremendous thought from day 2 to meditate on God's omnipotence. We can't even conceive of it because we can't conceive of the physical power contained in the universe. We can't even conceive of God having greater power than that. His power is infinite. Also, verse 7 speaks of the separation. Similar to day 1, there were separation between the light and the darkness. God again making distinctions, defining things, separating them, giving form, giving substance. We spoke a little bit of that last time. Now, there's an issue here, 2 views of the water separated. Most of the scholars, not only the Hebrew scholars, but those that get into the sciences as well, hold to the first view of what's going on with the separating of these waters. They see the atmosphere. In fact, this is an old creationist view that held to a canopy above the atmosphere, canopy of water, and they would hold to the idea that God separated the waters from the earth and distinguished those from the waters that are in the atmosphere. That's a very common viewpoint, and Russ would not put it down entirely, but he holds to a different one and probably a better view. He sees at the edge of the universe, these waters would be the boundary of the outer reaches of the universe. I'll show you some of his slides in a moment. So I would tend, I think it's a grander thought, and probably it probably supports the evidence better for the second view. So on day 2, we have the revelation, we have the articulation, we have the creation, we have the separation, and it was so. It was done. It was accomplished. The accomplishment. By the way, I said this is on your outline sheet on the back. The accomplishment tells us that we have the immediacy of fulfillment again. Remember I mentioned last time, we had the same thing with the creation of light. It happens immediately. After it is spoken, it is done. We have immediacy of fulfillment. Not eons and eons of time, not ages and ages within each day, but it was done. So just a little 2 words in the Hebrew text supports the idea of immediacy of fulfillment within a very relatively short period of time, within 1 day. God creates this separation. And perhaps at the beginning of the day, God stretches the universe out, and by the end of that day, it is completed, it is done. And then in verse 8, we have the naming. And God called, we had this also, He named the light and the darkness, and God called the expanse heaven. So He's speaking of the universe, He's speaking of space. It's the heavens. Now, the word heavens, is used in different senses in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. It most certainly is used of the atmosphere. It's actually used in this context when we talk about the day when God, day 5? When God creates the birds, they fly in the expanse that God names as the heavens. So and the expanse of heaven. The word heaven is also used there. So it can refer to the atmosphere or the air that birds fly in and clouds gather, etc. And it's used in that way. Genesis 27:28, now may God give you the dew of heaven. In other words, where the rain comes from. Then he goes on into the verse. And there's other verses that indicate that as well. So even within this context, it is used in the word heaven, and the word expanse is limited to the atmosphere. But there's also an abundance of usages that refer to beyond the atmosphere and even beyond the solar system where the stars are, where the sun is, because the word expanse and also the word heavens is contained in day 4 when it refers to God placing the lights in the heavens. So it refers also in some context to space. Now the word heavens also refers in some context to the dwelling place of God himself, which probably is beyond the universe, outside of the universe, because he's transcendent, he's distinct, he's separate, he exists outside of his created universe. So he names it heaven. And did I read the text? He called the expanse heaven. And then he concludes, and there was evening, and there was morning, a second day. Well, let's look at one more thing, or two more things here. There's the chronology at the end of verse 8. Some more implications. A fourth implication, and this leads us to that idea that I mentioned by way of introduction, the encouraging part about this passage and this idea that can give us a sense of security, because it speaks of his sovereignty. Now, if you remember last time when God named the light, I mentioned on that context, there were two things that are involved in the Hebrew thinking of naming. One of them is the ability to distinguish characteristics, the ability to identify, the ability to be able to recognize characteristics and qualities in whatever is being named. And God grants man that ability as he grants man the ability to speak and to communicate in language. Man has that ability, and he has the ability to put things in categories and to name things. But there's a second thing. So a name, before I get to the second thing, a name in Hebrew thought is not just a label. So the giving of a child's name was just not a cute, catchy name. It had significance. It captured the essence of the person. And the name of God, when it's used of God, we're talking about the essence of who God is, the totality of God. So that's the issue of naming. And then his ability to be able to name particular issues or things is all of that behind it. The second thing in naming, it has the theme of sovereignty. That's why I have it as an implication here. God is acting sovereignly. To name something means that you are above it because you can identify it. You can indicate its characteristics. I use the analogy, and you see this in the Old Testament, when a king would conquer a new people or a new land, they would change the name and name it something different, change the name of the city. We even see this in the naming of individuals. When God deals with Abraham and his character changes, he changes his name from Abram to Abraham. Jesus changes Peter's name from Cephas to Peter. Saul is, after his conversion, Paul. Good point. No, I was just following you. So this idea, and implicit in that, is the one that gives the name has authority over or sovereignty over. And this is an extremely encouraging thing. In fact, one of the most comforting doctrines in all of Scripture, to me at least, is this idea that God is sovereign. That God has worked in such a way that he does things according to His plan, in His timing, and He has all of the power to accomplish what He desires. And you and I are under that sovereign hand. The same sovereign hand that, in fact, spread out the universe, created the earth, put the lights into the sky. In Psalm 103:19, the Lord has established His throne in the heavens. The idea of a throne, a place where He rules, a place where He exercises authority and sovereignty. And His sovereignty rules over all. By the way, there's synonymous parallelism right there. That's a poetic passage, synonymous parallelism. The Lord has established His throne in the heavens. What follows is not very much different, just worded differently and emphasized in different ways. And the second part of the line, and His sovereignty rules over all. In other words, the throne in the heavens over everything. And then in the next line, over all. Throne, the place where He rules. And then in the second line, sovereignty, sovereignly ruling, or sovereignty rules. So God is sovereign. He was sovereign when He stretched out the waters, or the universe. Jesus Himself claims deity in Matthew 28:18. Jesus came up and spoke to them saying, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and earth." Do you know Jesus? If you do, He is sovereign over you, and that's a great comfort because He has a purpose, He has a plan, and that plan is not going to be thwarted. God is going to complete what He began. He began a good work, and He's going to complete it. That's a tremendously comforting thing to contemplate. So the same God that separated the waters, the same God that stretched out the heavens, the same God that created the heavens and the earth is the God that deals with me intimately and individually. That is tremendous. Let's conclude by looking, fifthly, at some possibilities very quickly that we may have by way of description of what may be going on scientifically. And I'll revert to Humphrey's theory here. If you're familiar with his book, Starlight in Time, he uses Einstein's general theory of relativity. And those equations, and by the way, those equations are used by all cosmologists. So all of them utilize the same formulas. They just plug in different assumptions into those formulas. And what Russ is doing, using the same formulas, plugging in different assumptions and coming up with a different outcome. And Russ's assumptions are probably better because they're based on scriptural statements. He says this is a new creationist theory. Now, this is a theory dealing with time. These are his slides. The white ones are Russ's slides, all right? The colored ones are mine. This new creation theory starts from a biblical basis. Biblical assumptions give a different cosmology. The Big Bang theory uses non-biblical assumptions, and they come up with different conclusions from the same theory, from the same formulas that Einstein formulated. The Big Bang assumptions need scrutiny, he says. The Big Bang, the assumption, now this is different, and he makes a big point of this, and I have a hard time conceiving of it, but I believe what he says. He says the assumptions that they make, not the popular descriptions of the Big Bang, but those that actually are working technically in the field, they make the assumption that the universe has no edge, which is probably unbiblical.